Perfect.
Unless you want to join us.
We're going to split it, actually. I'm going to start.
And then you're going to pass it over to me.
Yeah, okay.
We got two cameras here. Wow.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dave Barry from CKPG in Prince George here. I work at CKPG News for the television station as well as for 99.3 The Drive and 101.3 The River. Thanks very much for coming out this evening. I think it's going to be an interesting evening full of lots of discussion. Good opportunity for everybody to get some of those questions that you've wanted to have answered about the HST answered. We have to thank UNBC for hosting us tonight. Of course, this is an institution which was developed here in the North for the North, and it was developed in part for one of these reasons, and it's probably one of the big reasons for the success of UNBC is its close tie to the community, and this is a perfect example. The community is gathering here at UNBC tonight to discuss an issue that I think affects every British Columbian, and it provides the opportunity for us to have a good, frank discussion, respectful, of course, at all times, but at the same time, a good, frank discussion where there's no stupid question tonight, and certainly there's lots of time to ask our questions. So thanks to UNBC. This is one of 11 sessions being held around the province over the coming weeks. We've had one in Dawson Creek earlier this week, and from here it goes south. We're here as a result of the Public Dialogue Fund. It was created by the provincial government. It's independently administered, though, by BC's universities, colleges, and institutes through three associations, the BC Colleges, BC Association of Institutes and Universities, and the Research Universities Council of BC. So our goal here tonight, once again, is to organize a forum that provides a format that is informal and impartial, and allows British Columbians to have their questions answered and allows each side to provide their viewpoints equally. So we have two official sides, don't we? We have the Fight HST side, and they are the yes side, supporting the referendum to return to the PST and GST. And representing the Fight HST group, the society, is Chris Delaney and Bill Vander Zalm. The Smart Tax Alliance is on my right, the no side, so they support a referendum vote to return to the HST. And we have David Robertson and Dan McLaren representing the Smart Tax Alliance tonight. So once again, we're just here to provide a forum that provides everybody with an equal opportunity to get their message out. We're going to have an opening, a rebuttal, then an opportunity for everyone to ask questions, not only here seated with us in the Canfor Theatre, but also online through some of these social media locations. We've got everything from Twitter to streaming audio to Facebook. What else is up there? Just about everything under the sun as far as social media. And certainly if you have a phone, a smartphone like this, make sure you've turned the ringer off like I've just done. And, but at the same time, please feel free to use it. And if you're into that type of thing, you can tweet some messages. And if you use the hashtag, which is the #HSTPG, you'll be able to watch the tweets that are coming up from others who may be online or may be in the room providing their viewpoints through their telephones or through their computers at home. So an opportunity to experience the social media side of it as well tonight. So let's, after we get done with the questions, of course, we'll have a quick closing and we'll be on our way right around 9 o'clock. So we'll start with the opening, and through a coin toss in Dawson Creek, it was determined the order of the opening all the way through the 11 processes. So tonight's opening is led by the Smart Tax Alliance, right, the no side. And leading off will be David, right?
That's correct.
Okay, David.
First of all, I want to say thank you all for coming. And then I have to say, wow, what a difference 48 hours can make. Because, as noted, we did this debate in Dawson Creek. And, well, before I get into it, I should probably explain who I am. My name's David Robertson, and I am a tax partner with a law firm affiliated with Ernst & Young. Essentially, I'm a sales tax geek. And I want to point out, I'm not a politician. I don't have any affiliation with any political party. And I don't know Christy Clark or the Minister of Finance, and I don't even know Adrian Dix. Second, I'm not being paid to be here. I'm here because I honestly believe that HST is far superior to the old antiquated provincial sales tax. I've been practicing sales tax for 15 years, which means that day in, day out, for the past 15 years, I've dealt with the GST and HST system, and I've dealt with the provincial sales tax system. And I've seen firsthand how the provincial sales tax system kills jobs, provides a disincentive to invest in the province, and fundamentally imposes an extra burden on not only government, not only businesses, but additional confusion on consumers in the province as well. But I started this by saying, wow, what a difference 48 hours can make. Because I'm certain no one in this room's missed it, but let's just review what happened in the past 48 hours. The provincial government announced they will be reducing the HST rate by 2%. They've announced that for families and for seniors of lower and middle income, you'll be receiving $175 per person in order to compensate you for the extra HST that you've paid since the time of implementation. And those checks are in the mail. In addition, one of the greatest criticisms that Mr. Vander Zalm and Mr. Delaney have had is they've said, look, this is a shift from business on to the consumer. And I sit down and I go, well, we got to remember, everyone's a consumer. Jimmy Pattison's a consumer. And he's a big consumer. But at the same time, I just want to be very clear. The criticism was that there has been a shift of the tax burden from business onto the consumer. And what's the government done? The government has turned and said, we are increasing the corporate tax rate by 2%. They have shifted it back. So I look at all that and I go, it's a complete win-win. I've been opposed to the PST because I think it's absolutely ludicrous that we're one of the only jurisdictions in all of the Western world. The only others were the other provinces who have PST, who impose 2 forms of sales tax on their citizens. That's double the complexity, that's double the administration, that's double the burden. If you're in favor of smaller government, if you're in favor of a simplified tax system, the HST is it. I look at this and it's become a simple choice. You're either in favor of having 2 taxes, the PST and the GST, at a rate of 12%, or 1 tax, the HST, at a rate of 10%. Now, let me be clear, and here's the thing that I didn't think I would be saying during any of these debates. I need to acknowledge Mr. Vander Zalm and Mr. Delaney, and I really need to acknowledge the citizens of British Columbia, because you just gave this tax geek a lesson in democracy. You just taught me, you showed that the people can come together and they don't have to, if they disagree with a government policy, they can force the government to change. And that's what you did. That's what's been achieved. Now, in the lesson in democracy, I don't like the way you did it. I want to be really clear. I don't like the way that you told people that HST surrenders BC's sovereignty to Ottawa, and you know that's not true. We set our own tax rate. You know that we don't do that. You know we set our tax rates. We set our exemptions under the HST. What got me out here was you were telling low-income British Columbians they were financially worse off under the HST, when in fact they're not. let me be very...
Now, hold on here. We're going to have a 10-minute opening. There'll be a chance to ask some questions, so let's allow David to complete his time. Thanks.
Look, as I said last night, I want to address your concern right off the top. If I could have just an extra time for the opening. I live next to the downtown east side in Vancouver. I walk... What is your income, sir? Nobody's business. If you...
We've got 5 minutes. We've got 5 minutes left for your opening.
All right, if I can pick up from there. You also told people that they were paying thousands of dollars of more tax, when in fact you knew that they weren't, on thousands of items. And you told them as well that large corporations were the beneficiaries of this, when in fact this is a tax rate that is aimed at small and medium-sized businesses. And those myths and those misrepresentations got this tax geek to come up from his office, from behind his desk, and to say, those aren't true, because I'm frustrated by that. But yesterday, the government changed. And that was because of you. And I may not agree with the means, but I agree with the ends. And I have to say, I acknowledge you for that. I congratulate you on that. And in fact, I would turn and say, I realize that everyone's still riled up saying we hate the HST. But this has become a debate of, do you want two taxes, double the complexity, double the administration at a rate of 12%? Or do you want a single sales tax? Because that's the option. It's either GST and PST, or it's just HST at 10%. It's the burden that's been put on us. But let's talk about burden in that respect. Why don't you give us, Dan?
Mr. Chairman, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dan McLaren. I'm the president of Commonwealth Financial. Our company was formed about 15 years ago, and we're located in downtown Prince George. In addition to insurance, planning, and financial services, one of the things our company started off doing about a year ago is a pretty aggressive capital project in downtown Prince George. And the reason I was asked to attend this meeting was to speak to how the HST versus the PST and the GST works in the real world here in Prince George. I'm also proud to say that I think on the entire panel, with the notable exception of Mr. Chairman, I'm the only one that's here from Prince George. We invested in our downtown capital project into a medical center, which we're very happy to say we cut the ribbon on, approximately 6 to 7 months ago. And at that time, one of the things that helped us make a decision was the way the tax regime worked. Near the end of our construction phase, we were able to get a $208,000 HST rebate. And what a lot of people would think or would say is that we probably issued a dividend to our shareholders. That didn't happen. We gave a bonus to management. That didn't happen. What we did with our $208,000, are you ready for this? We hired a carpenter who did tenant improvements. We hired a plumber that went out and installed new plumbing. We hired an electrician that did electrical work, and at the end of the day, we were in a position, I think, perhaps not entirely because of the HST, but certainly one of the many decisions being made in a decision to determine whether or not our environment is friendly, was that we had started a residential project in the downtown that now, because of the way our cash flow is able to get structured, we get a regular rebate of $30,000 a month that we're able to expand, develop, and grow for seniors housing. And what we're hoping to do with that is to make affordable housing in downtown. The first time that's ever happened, I would respectfully argue, in the last 50 years. So if the argument is you're just using this to help the rich, I would respectfully tell you that I'm here to tell you that we're here to help the poor. Where some people would say that we're there to make business people richer, I'm here to tell you that we're just doing the opposite. So I applaud everybody for coming out, and I know, Mr. Chairman, we're coming near the end of our time, because I think what we're doing here today is an outstanding exercise in democracy. And I know that advocating in any case for any kind of a tax is never going to be that popular. But let me leave you with this cause, because I know my friend David said it, and I'm going to say it again too. We have a choice before us. And God bless us, we live in Canada. It's a choice where free men can speak freely without fear or hindrance. We have a choice of two taxes at 12%. or one tax at 10%. And if you care about jobs, if you care about jobs, and if you care about investment, then I would say stand with us for 2 taxes going out the door and 1 lower tax coming in.
All right, that's 10 minutes. All right, that's 10 minutes. Thanks. Now the fight, HST, for 10 minutes. You're open.
Well, I can agree with David on one thing. I don't like the HST, but I don't like the PST that much either. As a matter of fact, I think both are very regressive. And I look forward to the day when a government will get rid of a consumer tax, a social services tax, such as we know it. When you pay your HST, which incidentally, they will claim is $350 per year per family, but that figure came from the so-called independent panel. And the way they came up with the figure was to calculate into the number that you pay the fact that according to them, 90% of what you pay in HST will come back in lower prices. Now, if anyone here has seen a lower price in a Prince George store, in a Vancouver store, in any store in BC, for anything, I want to see you after the meeting. Because I don't think any price has come down. Every price has gone up, contrary to what's been said. Tonight I had a chance to watch television for only about 25 minutes, BC TV. And they had 3 very expensive ads telling me that HST is a wonderful thing. Now these ads were from the Smart Tax Group, and the other was a stick man. And I was asked this evening again, we haven't seen any ads from Fight HST. Well, you know, we were each given $250,000, thank you very much, of taxpayers' money to present our side and their side. But there's no limit to what we can spend. Now we have, that's our limit, $250,000, plus the time Chris and I and many others volunteer. They have a big business community backing them up, and obviously they can and probably will spend millions of dollars. And the government has thrown in, they say $5 million. I can almost guarantee you before it's done, they'll have spent $10 million. But yesterday was a day for us to celebrate and a day for us to question. We could celebrate because for the first time since this process started almost 2 years ago now, the government admitted they were wrong. In fact, they said we were right. We've been saying since day one that this is a burden on the consumer, a big burden on the consumer. And keep in mind as well, when you pay that HST, you're paying it with money on which you already paid income tax. So the real figure, incidentally, is not $350 per family. It comes to about $1,200 on average per family per year in extra tax. And that, to our way of thinking, is a tremendous burden for the average family or the average person in this province today. Another $1,200 per year for a family is just too much, or $300 or $400 for a senior citizen is just too much. There comes a time when you say, we can't take it anymore. Now they'll tell you, but it's good for business. Well, the government just came back and said, they realized it was a burden and they would reduce the tax. Now, mind you, it's only a promise, and this government's promises have not been too great. It's only a promise, and they're going to give back $175 to the children, and the seniors. And that's a one-time payment. And ironically, I guess, if you have a family that's earning maybe $40,000 a year, which is not that much this time, in this time, now at this time it's $40,000, doesn't get you very much. But if you earn that much, then the $175 becomes an add-on and is a taxable item, income taxable. They've also admitted, the government, that really, as was projected and told us by the so-called independent panel, the HST is not going to create all those jobs. As a matter of fact, originally the government said it was going to create far in excess of 100,000 jobs, extra jobs, over 10 years. The independent panel has come back and said maybe 24,000 jobs. And it's no longer, as we had been told initially, revenue neutral. As a matter of fact, it's revenue for the business group by way of a rebate, and the government has its hands in your pocket again, because they're going to get a big chunk as well. It's a tax grab too. And the government has finally recognized that. So it was, in a way, a day to celebrate. But it's also a day to question. To question how a government could be so far out. Could they not have known 2 years ago when they first surprised us after the election, when they said they wouldn't do it, when they first surprised us and we found that they were going to do it anyway? Could they not have calculated through the Ministry of Finance and all of those so-called economic experts we've heard from that there was going to be an extra $850 million for somebody in all of this? They missed $850 million, all of these financial experts. It's hard to believe. And it's a day to question as well the democracy that we live in this province. Now, I've always said, and I was part of this, we elect a dictatorship every 4 years. Fortunately, for the most part, we've had benevolent dictators, and that's been okay. We've gotten by, but it's not good. And here we have a government that was told way back already that 85% of the people opposed the tax. And they said, we don't care. We're just going to go ahead anyway. We think it's good for you. These people that all of us elect to represent us in Victoria, didn't listen to their constituents. They just went ahead and did it anyway. So we have to really wonder how it is we might tell the people in Victoria, present and future, that, hey, the constituents come first. It's the constituents that elected you, took you there, pay your salaries, give you your pension, provide all of the benefits, and you need to listen to your constituents. If we allow them to get away with the stalling that they've done, the stalling that they did purposely thinking that sooner or later we'd forget and give up, which hasn't happened, if we allow them to get away with that, if we allow them to get away with having said during an election that there was something they wouldn't do and then they did it anyway, then there's no telling what might happen next. Let's get more of it. We'll get more of it. You'll get more of it. This is an opportunity for us to really practice democracy in a way such as we've never seen it in this province before. Now, the moving from 12% to 10% is not bad, but in order to get back to what we were paying under the PST, you would have to move back to about 8 or 8.5%. Yes.
No, that's not true.
Well, it depends on whether the calculations are done by a lawyer or an economist or the people. But I guess the people, you can have your numbers in theory. The people find out when they go to the store what it is they pay each and every time. So the tax is a burden. The tax is a burden. The tax is not creating jobs. As a matter of fact, the jobless rate in BC, unfortunately, is going up. We don't have, obviously, the economic activity that the government said we would have, because now they're going to up the income tax, and they're going to cancel the small business tax break. Now, if They're out there trying to help business. If this is so good for business, and if HST is going to create all that business activity, why would they be increasing taxes? So you have to question what they do in Victoria and why it is they did it. Folks, we have an opportunity here like we've never had it before. We have an opportunity to tell the government, we don't want the HST. You can tinker with it all you want. We want to go back to what it is we had. And if you find a better way, come to the people. Let's talk about it. Let's work it out together.
Okay, so we've had the opening statements. Now, when you walked in tonight, you likely received a piece of paper. On that piece of paper, you could write a question down. And we're going to have people coming around to take those questions. Who are those people that are coming around? Just put up your hand. Okay. Out here, Carmen and Lizette. Okay. So when you see those people come along, just hand your questions to them, and they will be filtered down to us. We'll also be taking questions online as well, and those will be filtered to us. And yes, yeah. Well, the questions will be coming through to me. The ones that are in the building here, the questions will be coming through to me, and I'll be passing them on or reading them out. But certainly you can ask a question as well with a microphone. But before the question period, I should have mentioned that if you have to take a quick break, the bathrooms are just outside the doors, and then just stay the hallways. Go back this way and stay the hallways.
What about the rebuttal?
Okay?
Rebuttal. Yeah.
So the rebuttal goes the opposite way instead of the, the same way. The closing will go the opposite way. So we'll have, first of all, the Smart Tax Alliance, first of all, with a 5-minute rebuttal. And I believe David's going to lead the way.
Mr. Vander Zalm, thank you very much. You finally said it. You want to get rid of social service tax, which is the PST legislation, and you said it's not a good tax. And as Mr. Delaney's pointed out in his Fights HST website, he said, let's get rid of the HST, let's go back to the PST, and then let's figure out what's the best tax. And I'm turning and saying, it's a huge cost and expense to do 2 steps, which you can do directly. If you have a better tax than the HST, let's go directly to it. Let's not go back a step. Let's go directly to it. That's what I'm proposing to you. I personally, let me explain why, how, in practical layman terms, why people prefer HST over PST. So if you are, excuse me, I want to give you an example. If you have a school teacher and a trucker, an independent trucker, they both earn $50,000 a year. They both earn 50.
Let's let him finish up. Okay, he's got 5 minutes, so let's give him his 5 minutes, please.
So if they both earn $50,000 a year, they're both paying the same amount of income tax. But the trucker, in order to earn his $50,000, he's got to buy a rig. That's going to cost him $100,000. And what does the government do? The government shows up and says, we want $7,000 of provincial sales tax. And we want it regardless of whether you've earned any income or not. We don't care whether you were profitable or not. We're going to take the tax from you right off the top. And then they turn and say, and we want 7% on your tires. We want 7% on your repairs. We want 7% on your cell phone bill. And you look at that and you're saying, you're taxing that trucker before he's earned any income. With HST, HST turns and says, we're the government, we don't want to put you down when you're trying to earn a living. If you spend money to try and earn a living, we will give you your sales tax back. And we will, exactly, all of it. And we will, the only time that we will tax you is when you're actually paying for personal consumption. Now, the reason why everyone sits down and says that's a good thing, because there's 3 points in time when the government can tax you. They can tax you when you're investing your money in yourself and your business, or in yourself as an independent trucker. They can tax you when you've earned income, that's income tax, or they can tax you when you go to spend your money. And I'm actually the opposite of Mr. Vander Zalm on this point. I turn and say, don't tax me when I'm investing. Don't tax me when I'm earning my income, because I can take that income and I can use it to save, I can use it to invest, or I can use it to spend. The sales tax only taxes you when you're spending. So if you sit down and say, when's the best time, if we get to choose, and we get to choose when to get taxed, then I want to be taxed when I spend my money, because I can avoid sales tax, because I can save it, I can pay down my mortgage, I can pay down my debts. And that, to me, is a better system than giving people a disincentive not to work and taxing on income tax. Now, but let me be very clear. This debate isn't about that. This debate is, if you can envision a world where there isn't any PST or GST, excellent. But that's not our choice. Our choice right now is whether we want two taxes, the GST and the PST at 12%, or we want HST at 10%. That, to me, is a no-brainer. That's a no-brainer.
3 years from now.
No, but if... No, let me be very... Can I be very clear? Let me be very...
1 minute left, please.
I have 1 minute left, and let me respond to that. I am not a member of the government. I am someone who has worked at this. I have worked at this field for 15 years. And I can tell you, I'm glad you're holding the government to account. Because it's going to be you keeping the government to account. The fact that you hate HST is a good thing. Why? Because governments will be scared to raise the rate. It's going to drop to 10%. They're not going to touch it, and they're going to be scared to raise the rate. Now, the fact that you're keeping them to account is absolutely excellent. I've got 15 years experience in dealing with this tax, and I can give you this evening a number of practical examples as to how the PST kills jobs. I ask this, we've got a choice between, if we keep HST, there's 24,000 more jobs created in the province if we keep the HST. If we go back to PST, we have no additional jobs. It's a no-brainer.
Thank you. Okay, you guys, slow down here. Let's give everyone a chance to have their piece. We're going to have some chances to ask questions. It's an emotional subject, I realize, but let's allow everyone to have their piece and say what they have to say for the benefit of the entire crowd. Is that okay? Is that fair? Yeah. I think so. Okay. All right, so I'm going to ask Carmen and Lizette maybe to just start moving up and down the rows, and you can pass your questions along. So once David has completed his rebuttal, we'll be able to get right into some questions, okay? Go ahead.
Chris.
Go ahead. This
David
is
finished?
Chris, are you going to lead?
Yeah.
Chris Delaney with Fight HST.
All right. You know, one of the things that strikes me as interesting about this whole debate, and Bill and I were talking about this yesterday, is just how stupid the government thinks that we are. So you just heard them say here that the choice is between a 12% GST and PST and a 10% HST. But they conveniently leave out the fact that hundreds of items that were not taxed under PST are now taxed under HST. And those hundreds of items add up to billions of dollars in extra taxes for British Columbians every year. Every year. Even if this government could be relied upon to keep its promise, and we know it isn't, we also know that the second percentage cut will come after the next election. They may not even be here to honor that promise. Even if they could, you would have to cut it down much more in order to match what we paid under PST. But here's the kind of good news, I guess. For 2 years now, the government has told us that the HST was not just a good tax. They told us it was the best thing they could possibly do to stimulate the economy of British Columbia. And then yesterday, the Premier admitted, no, it wasn't. It was too high, it was a tax grab, it didn't create jobs, unemployment has gone up, prices have gone up, the economy is stagnant, and the HST is a big cause of that. The government admitted that. So the only good thing you can say about that is that it was a game changer in the sense that it changed the debate. We're no longer debating whether the HST is a good tax and the PST is a bad tax, or whether the HST is a good tax or a bad tax. Both sides now agree the HST is a bad tax. What we're debating is about how to solve that problem. The government says the solution, and I really want to hear the Smart Tax Alliance debate there defend this. The solution is we're going to overtax you, but we're going to give you some of it back. How's that for a solution, right? If that's the solution, folks, if that's good economics, then raise the HST by 2 percentage points and give everybody $500. That is kindergarten economics. This is a government that is so far out of touch with reality, they are living in the penthouse suite on cloud cuckoo land. I have never seen anything like this in my life. This is not economics. This is naked, raw politics by a desperate government trying to hoodwink the public. As bad as the PST might be, it is far superior to the HST because we pay less. Because consumption will go up, and when consumption goes up, demand goes up, and productivity goes up to meet demand. When you increase productivity by giving business a cut while burdening the consumer with more costs, then you're creating widgets nobody can buy. That doesn't even make any economic sense. What are you going to do, put them in a warehouse for a better day when the sun starts shining again? The HST is a disaster, and the government has admitted it. They blinked yesterday. And they thought they would save the tax. I say they pushed the tax right over the cliff, and if Christy Clark and Kevin Falcon hang on too tightly, they're going over the cliff with it. The cost of canceling this tax, they want to tell us, and they're going to try to threaten. As this debate progresses and as they see that the people are not buying their bride, and by the way, that may even be illegal. You cannot promise to pay people money if they vote a certain way. That's against the Election Act, and they may be breaking the law. But even if when they see that people will not buy that bribe, they will become desperate, and the debate will get ugly. And they will start to tell us how terrible it will be if we cancel the HST, what a huge cost it will be. But I want you to remember this. Even if we had to repay the federal government the full $1.6 billion, and that's debatable, by the way, even if we have to pay $300 million to bring back the old tax collectors that are now working for the federal government to set that up, over the next 10 years, British Columbians will be paying out, depending on what kind of rebates they give or whatever else, an additional $20 to $24 billion in HST taxes that we didn't pay under PST. We cancel the HST, and we pay back that money that we have to if we have to. We will save ourselves tens of billions of dollars. It is a no-brainer, folks. Let's vote yes to extinguish the HST, get rid of the HST, go back to the PST, and send the government a message that they work for us, we don't work for them. Thank you, folks.
Okay, so we've had our openings and our rebuttals, and now it's time to open the floor for discussion. So first of all, I'll start with a question from one of the notes, but in the meantime, I'll ask you to raise your hand, and one of our roving microphones, Garth, right? Jeremy, sorry, Jeremy. Jeremy will walk around and come up to you, and you will be allowed to ask a question, okay? So go ahead, Jeremy, and I'll start with this first one. It's written for Chris Delaney, and both sides will have a chance to provide some comment on this. What will happen, Chris, if the Abolish HST campaign wins? When changes come into effect, what will the government change? So I think the question is, what happens if you win?
If we win?
Yes.
People win. And the people win. What will happen, the question that's being asked of you when your ballot comes is, do you wish to extinguish the HST and reinstate the PST? The meaning of that question has been clarified by the Chief Electoral Officer who wrote the question, and he says the word reinstate the PST means to restore it to its former position with the same exemptions as before. So I want you to remember that too as well when you hear the finance minister musing about applying PST to items that previously didn't have it. That will be another attempt to break the law by the government. This is a legally binding referendum. They are bound to the question. The finance minister himself does not have the authority to break the law. Second of all, if he did do something like that, I guess it would be proof positive that the HST is about a tax grab for government, not about benefits for business. Can you imagine putting PST on restaurant foods without even providing an input tax credit to the restaurants. You think they're closing fast now and we're losing jobs there quickly now? Imagine if the finance minister did that. He'd shut half the restaurants down in British Columbia. So that's sheer nonsense. The tax will go back to the PST, and I predict it will take them probably 3 to 4 weeks for it to happen. They're telling you it could take years. That's sheer nonsense as well. The federal government has gone on record. The Prime Minister has said, we will abide by the results of the referendum. We will abide by the wishes of the people of BC. It'll take no time at all to go back a few weeks to rejig things and do it again. If they drag it out, it's just another tax grab, another bleed of the people with more excuses for the reasons why and more reasons why that government will be destroyed if they do it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so that was about a minute and 20 seconds or so. So we're going to ask everyone to try and keep their answers within that time frame because I think we've got a lot of questions.
Okay,
Would you like
so
to pass along, Dave?
just in response to that, Mr. Delaney's correct. We will go back to the PST as it existed on June 30th, 2010 is what we will go back to. And let me demonstrate how that will kill jobs. Our law firm, just let me give you a practical example. When PST was in place, our law firm bought $2 million of accounting software. Our law firm bought $2 million of accounting software. We had a choice to put that in BC, in Ontario, or in Montreal. We put it in Montreal because Montreal has HST, or the equivalent of it. Ontario and British Columbia, we would have had to have paid an extra 8%, so $160,000 if we put it into Ontario, or $140,000 if we put it into British Columbia. Guess where all of the accounting and jobs went with our law firm? Our accounting was done out of our Montreal office, and the jobs that went along with that software went to Montreal. So if we restore the PST, when someone comes to me and asks, where do you put the software? I'm going to come back in this time and I'm going to say, because Ontario's got HST and is keeping it, I'm going to say, well, you can put it in Ontario, you can put it in Alberta, don't put it in British Columbia, and don't put the jobs here.
Okay. Okay, Jeremy, you have a question? Okay, I'm going to ask, so that this is your chance to speak, so go ahead and ask your question, but I'm going to ask that everyone listens to the question and listens to the answer too, please.
Okay, first of all, I just have I've got lots of points I could make, but first of all, what I really, really want to say is a great big thank you to Mr. Vander Zalm and to Mr. Delaney for helping make our government more accountable. I have noticed such an improvement in our MLAs since the petition and since the leadership change. A few weeks ago, we had ICBC coming out with they were going to ding us with something. Our MLA, Shirley Bond, was right there and saying, nope, this isn't going to happen.
They're asking you to move along to the question.
You're right. You're absolutely right. But I did want to say thank you very much for making our government more accountable.
Okay,
I was one of the people that led in the petition. And I did that because our government was not listening to us.
Okay, let's
The second point is, you're talking about jobs. I have got an example on the extreme other end of the scale. I've been treasurer of a church for several years. And our charitable donations, and I'm not just talking about church, I'm talking about all charitable donations, it's a discretionary giving, and it affects every one of your lives if you don't believe it, even if you don't go to church. In some way or other, it affects. And since HST has been introduced, we have had to lay off our cleaners, we've had to lay off our church secretaries, we have had to do the work ourselves because the giving is not there anymore. So I'm sorry, but I have not heard anything yet this evening. You seem to think that low and middle income earners are going to get a rebate on this. Well, then you must be making $80,000 a year, sir, if you think $40,000 is middle income.
Okay. All right, thank you.
If I can just respond on the question with respect to your church, you should be aware that your church receives a GST and an HST rebate of the GST and HST that they pay on their expenses. With HST, you're getting back a rebate of 75% of the tax that is paid.
All right. I think also the question that I heard there was religious groups or nonprofit organizations, how are they being, she seems to believe that they're being negatively impacted by the HST.
With respect to the impact of the HST, what the government realized is, you have to realize that churches and not-for-profits all paid PST as well. And when the government realized that everyone says not-for-profits don't pay any tax on the goods and services they buy. the brooms, the mops that get bought, the pews that are in the church, in fact, even the organ that gets bought for the church.
Let him answer.
Look, all of the...
Okay. Okay.
If I could please answer. With your church, the government realized when they brought in the HST that there was an additional tax that was being paid on services. For not-for-profits, including registered charities like churches, they receive a rebate of the HST that they pay. And it puts them in a position so they're in the exact same position that they were under PST.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. Would you like to respond to that question?
No, that's fine. We can move on.
Okay. All right. Our next question then is directed to Bill Vander Zalm. Have you discussed your position on the HST with the BC Chamber of Commerce?
Did I what?
Have you discussed your position on the HST with the Chamber of Commerce or other groups, business groups, I
think
suppose?
you know what it is.
Yeah, I think I knew all along what the position of the BC Chamber of Commerce was. As a matter of fact, I was once a member of the BC Chamber of Commerce, and my response when they first came on side of the HST was that they cater largely to House Street, and I still believe that. I have nothing against business. We need business, and I'm all in support of business, and I'm personally involved in business, and probably in business, as Dave mentioned, get some money back. But it's the consumers we're talking about. It's the consumers that are paying the bill, and it's the consumers that really need to have this protection against another tax burden.
Okay.
I'd like to just add one thing to that. The BC Chamber of Commerce claims that they're in support of the HST. But the BC Chamber of Commerce, as Bill pointed out, just to clarify, is a small group of people on Howe Street in Vancouver. The Chambers of Commerces, which exist in all the various communities across British Columbia, have a variety of different opinions on the HST, but you never hear that. When it first came out, the Vernon Chamber of Commerce, for example, voted 95% against the HST. So that's a bit of a spin that the government uses and the Chamber of Commerce uses to try to make it sound like all business is in support of the HST. All business is not in support of the HST. I just got a call from a plumber who's a member of the Chamber of Commerce in Victoria telling me, you got to kill this tax, it's killing my business. So just so you know, it's not unanimous.
All right, Dan McLaren.
As a director of the BC Chamber of Commerce, I think Bill should first of all point out he wasn't merely a member, he was our provincial president before becoming premier, and we thank him for his service. I take a bit of offense, though, Chris, to say I'm a guy from Prince George who has a little mortgage brokerage business and done some development, and I'm on the board of directors of the BC Chamber of Commerce. So to paint me as some kind of mining mogul who has some master plan to manipulate the economy, at some point in time, style without substance really is a dangerous thing. So I would say to you, if you've got a member, sir, if you've got a member who's a member of the chamber, because when you told me the story earlier today, you never said it was a member of the chamber. That be conveniently added to the story. I call upon you to please, and as a provincial director, I will personally phone him tonight.
Well, he didn't give me his name, but let me just tell you this. You explain to me then how the structure of the Chamber of Commerce works. Do you dictate policy and the decisions of all the chambers below you, or do they tell you?
Well, the first...
Let's stick to the topic.
Yeah, no, this isn't about the...
Now let's just stick to the topic.
Yeah, well, the first rule of debate is to know the answer before you ask the question, so I'm glad you brought it up. As Bill will tell you, your colleague, the BC Chamber of Commerce is the most grassroots policy impact and procedures in British Columbia. We met last year in Vancouver, this year, by the way, next weekend, here in Prince George, and every chamber sends its delegates. In this town, we have approximately 1,000 members of the chamber, and I will tell you, do you know the number of people that quit because of this issue? There is a number. It's more than one. It's less than 10. It's 7. So I won't say that your issue was without cause or concern, because it was something the local chamber took very, very seriously. But to say 95% of small businesses against it, that's a falsehood.
That's not what I said.
That is a falsehood.
You don't even listen.
Okay.
Inverted. 95%
Ask the folks what I just said.
All right, okay.
You don't even listen.
We're going to
You
move
don't
on
tell
to...
the truth, sir.
We're going to move... You guys, wow. Okay, let's move along to a question in the audience here.
Hello. So although you guys have a really spirited argument going on here, I have one for the anti-HST. How much will it cost to revert back to the PST, and who will be paying for that?
Okay, so the question is,
How much will it cost to
how much
revert?
will it cost to revert back to the PST, GST?
And who will be
And
paying?
who will pay that?
Well, no one really knows what the cost exactly, but I think I can safely say it's a lot less money than what the government is throwing at advertising the HST today.
But we should make this...
David, would you like to?
The advertising budget is $5 million. The cost of hiring the auditors on an annual basis is $35 million, is what we'll be facing. And in addition to that, just to understand, if BC goes back, it will be the first time any province has harmonized and gone back. And the cost if I could.
Okay, let's stop here. Okay, we're going to ask that you please refrain, show respect. These people are here. Most of them as volunteers.
Okay, then.
So please, let's show some respect.
So, just to be very clear, it will be the first time a province is converted back. The federal and provincial governments have never done so. That's an entire new set of legislation that needs to be drafted. It took the provincial governments 9 months to work through. Actually, it took them longer than that. Remember, the announcement was made by Ontario in March of 2009, and the introduction date was July 1st, 2010. Throughout that period of time, the bureaucracies in both Victoria, in Toronto, and in Ottawa were working night and day to get regulations out. Because let's put it in perspective. If you are someone who just bought a condo...
Okay, the question is the cost.
The cost. So in the cost of doing so, I can tell you that business, it's not as simple as just going in and reprogramming your cash register. Every small business will have to reprogram their cash register. Every small business will have to reprogram their point of sale system in order to go back.
All right.
Can I just add one point?
Okay,
Just a short
let's move on to the next
but just to clarify it just to put it in real simple terms, the main cost that we will face to go back to the PST will be negotiating what the repayment to Ottawa will be and reinstating the tax collectors here in British Columbia instead of from Ottawa. That probably at maximum would total up to about $2 billion, but the federal government has been collecting additional corporate income tax from companies that used to get a tax write-off under PST that now have to pay income tax on that money because they get it back on HST to the tune of about $300 million a year they're taking out of BC. So everything's negotiable. Premier Clark has said that herself. It would be a negotiation. It's likely to be substantially less than anything near $2 billion. But what we have to keep in mind is what is the cost of keeping it, not paying it back. Okay. Keeping it will be $20 billion. Paying it back would be $2 billion. It's a pretty easy...
All right, very quickly.
Mr. Delaney, you're very good at spouting figures, but $2 billion represents the health and education budget in this province is $24 billion. If you're going to take that out, then you're going to take that out of health and education. And I think there's a lot of people in this room who rely on both.
All right. Okay, we have another question. All I can say is it's a good thing the Canucks win last night, because if they lost last night, you guys would be in an unholy mood. So let's move on. The next question is for the Smart Tax Alliance. Why do you think taking $1,200 out of my bank account each year is going to improve the economy when companies are already making large profits? Why do you think $1,200 out of my bank account each year?
So you're saying you're paying $1,200 in additional HST every year. So that's the question. That equates to $17,142 that you are spending every year on items that weren't subject to PST previously. That means you're spending it on restaurant meals and entertainment. That's what you're saying that amount translates into. Okay. All I'm doing is taking the math. If you're saying $1,200, divide by 0.07, and you will determine how much you have to spend.
All right. Okay. Would you like to make a comment on that, Chris or Bill?
Oh, we got the $1,200. Well, my only comment is I think the number that was used by the panel, and they illustrated this in their report, was based upon getting 90% of what it is you paid back by way of lower prices. I don't believe that's going to happen. So it is $1,200, as was mentioned, and that's extra cost to the average family.
You can do the calculation yourself. The government is collecting an additional $2.8 billion in HST that they didn't collect from you under PST.
That's not true.
There's 1,800,000 families in British Columbia. If you divide that into 2.8 billion, you get roughly $1,208. That's what it works out to. Now, if there are savings passed on, it might be a little bit less. But what the independent panel did was it accepted the projection that 90% of input tax credits paid to businesses would be passed on to you in lower prices. And if you believe that, well.
All right, now our next question from the audience.
Yes, and I just want to agree with what Chris just said. That was going to be my point. The government is collecting something like $2.5 billion, or at least that's, I shouldn't say the government's collecting. We're getting a $1.9 billion tax shift from business and corporations to consumers. That's the first thing that's happened. The second thing that happens is $800 million from a tax that was supposed to be revenue neutral is on top of that. So now we're up to about $2.5 billion. The people who are in favor of this tax are the people who are going to make money on it. And the people who are against this tax are the people who are going to pay it.
Okay, and your question?
Now,
Go ahead with your question.
my question is very simple. We didn't get here yesterday. We've had the PST for something like 40 years, okay? How did we manage to survive? Okay? And the other thing I want to ask you is the exemptions to the PST, and there were 110 of them, exemptions, everything from haircuts to dog food to you name it, are now going to be taxed at 7%. Those exemptions were put in there for a reason.
No, they weren't.
Yes, they were.
No, they weren't.
They were put in there so that kids could go and play hockey.
Okay.
They were put in there for school supply and those types of things. Why do you think we kept it for 40 years?
Okay, that's a good question. Go ahead and answer that.
When the GST was introduced, this is why it's a silly tax. It was introduced to tax goods. They just said, we're going to tax stuff, PST, when it was brought in. Then when the government needed more money, they turned and said, well, we're going to expand the tax base. We're going to start taxing computer software, because that's actually not tangible personal property, that's intangible personal property. Then they said we need some more money, so we're going to tax legal fees. So they expanded it to legal fees. And they kept expanding a tax which was designed to only tax goods. Didn't matter what it was being used for, it was just tax goods. HST turns and says, that doesn't make any sense. What we should do is turn and say, we shouldn't tax people when they're trying to earn a living. So my question to Mr. Vander Zalm is, you're a small business person. Why do you think a trucker should pay tens of thousands of dollars more to earn a living compared to a school teacher? And remember, the school teacher under HST, if they have to buy supplies, a computer for their classroom, and it's a term of their contract to do so, they can claim back the HST as well. Everyone's on an equal playing field with HST.
Okay.
With PST,
All right.
it's an unfair tax.
All right.
Maybe we respond?
Go ahead.
So the question that was on the floor was, why do you think we had the PST for so long? And it's a great question. So let's take a look at the HST and where it's been in Europe. They've had it in Europe since 1954, starting in France. So it's not that new of a tax, by the way. They like to tell you that this is the newest, trendiest thing we should all be doing. The PST came in 1947 here, and the HST, the value-added tax in France, came in 1954, about 7 years apart. So in Europe now, they've had it for 50, 60 years. It's now averaging about 21% in each country. It started off at 6%. It's so bad now that in countries like Greece and Ireland and Portugal and Spain and Italy, where their economies are teetering on the brink, they've gone underground. People don't want to pay the taxes anymore. Some economists estimate that as many as 80% of the people in Greece no longer pay taxes of any kind. They go off invoice for everything. They don't claim the income when they go off invoice to save the value-added tax, because if they get caught cheating on their taxes, so they can't claim anything. And it's bankrupting whole countries. That's how good the HST is. But let's take a look closer to home here in Canada. We've had the HST in Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick for almost 20 years. They've got the highest unemployment in Canada, and and some of the highest per capita debt. It's so bad in Nova Scotia now, they upped the HST to 15% to try to pay off their massive debts.
Let's just clarify, actually, Newfoundland has become a half province in that period of time.
With 12.5%.
Hold on here.
Just one quick
I think
question.
You've wrapped up. We've both had our chance at that
I
question.
do have just one point, which is, Chris, would introducing PST in Greece solve their financial problems?
Okay. We're not talking about Greece here tonight, but
No, it wouldn't.
I would like to get another question. We are running out of time. We've got about 20 minutes left for questions, okay? So we're going to try and shorten up our answers, and we're going to try and shorten up our questions, okay? Try not to make too long of a statement if you're going to make one before your question. Okay, for the smart tax. Government states that families are important with regards to the HST. That's true. But what about singles and seniors? Where is the savings, if any, for these people?
What the government announced yesterday, and in particular for seniors, is that seniors who earn $40,000 or less will receive the $175 transition credit. At $175,000 per person. If you put that together in a couple, that's $350, which is equal to what the additional tax that they say that you're paying. With respect to individuals, there's also in particular for students, there is the BC-HST credit. It's 3 times the size of the PST credit. The PST credit was only $75. The BC-HST credit is $230. In addition, just to be very clear, if you're a family, the BC-HST credit is paid for every member of the family. So if you have a family of 4 and you qualify, you get $920. If we go back to PST, that same family of 4 receives a PST credit of only $150.
Okay.
That's the comparison.
Thank you, David.
Next question.
All right, do we have a question from the floor here? Okay, we have one over here. Go ahead.
Thanks. I'm in business, and so as the HST is really a benefit for me in the sense that my bookkeeper has less work to do. But the reason I'm here is because my customers I'm in the health food business, and my customers are having to pay extra taxes on supplements, which, in talking to other health food businesses around the province, starting July 1st, 2010, there was a reduction in the purchases of health food products. So my question to the smart tax is, if, according to Angus Reid polls in the last few years, 70% of British Columbians are using health food supplements of some sort. If they stop using preventative measures because of the extra cost, what is going to be the cost to the healthcare system? Yeah. So that's my question to you. The question to the other side is, Bill, if the extra HST, extra tax was reduced from all the different categories, would you be supportive of the HST?
So
okay, we'll go first with Dave.
Okay, and let me be very clear. Vitamins and supplements is one area which was subject to GST, but was not subject to PST. And let me be very clear, there's been a tax increase on vitamins, to play it straight. The issue there is my recommendation, because I agree with you. I sit down and say, that's keeping the population healthy, that's reducing our healthcare costs. That's a circumstance where when you're going back to government, and we've seen the power of going to government, this has been something that the federal government, when they introduced the GST, this was an issue back in 1991 because it was suddenly being taxed, which wasn't taxed before. It's the same issue when we've introduced the HST. My recommendation in that regard is honestly, get the association together, get your association together, and push back. But let me be very clear. It doesn't make sense to go back to the PST system and I appreciate your issue, but it doesn't make sense to solve that's one small issue, and to impose the burden back on you of having to file 2 separate tax returns, to have to go back and track 2 separate taxes, and to go back to that point.
All right, you've answered the question. Would you like to have a rebuttal, first of all, to that question?
That's fine.
Okay, all right. So the second question was, what if they changed the rules around HST and made it more like the PST, I think was...
By having the same exemptions.
The same exemptions as the PST. What would your position be?
Well, my position doesn't change. I think having a tax administered before us in Ottawa is wrong. A provincial tax, a responsibility that belongs with the province, should not be assigned to Ottawa. I don't want Quebec and Ontario politicians involved in what it is we can or can't do. I think it's our decision provincially. We shouldn't have to go to Ottawa for anything other than what's Ottawa's responsibility.
All right. Go ahead, David.
Mr. Vander Zalm, you were the Premier of the province, and the federal government collects our provincial personal income tax and our corporate income tax. If you are so strongly opposed to the Canada Revenue Agency administering our taxes on our behalf, then why didn't you resume that power, cancel the tax collection agreement for personal income tax and corporate tax, and bring all that back, that bureaucracy back to Victoria?
Okay. All right. Now, our next question there is...
Bill can answer that.
He's got a point, but I wasn't there long enough.
Dare I ask why?
Low blow.
The next question is for Mr. Vander Zalm.
You, eh? You're dirty.
How will government pay for increasing health care and education costs? Government has a deficit. How do we pay for services people keep on asking for more and more of?
Should I repeat it?
So the question is, we've got rising costs for everything from health to education. How do we, and we keep on asking for more, how do we continue to supplement these services?
Well, the interesting thing about rising costs is that all of our taxes, whether they're income tax or whether they're sales taxes, are a percentage. So when the cost of living goes up, when the inflation goes up in the economy, when wages go up, we pay a greater percent. So theoretically speaking, and most times practically speaking, the percentage of income tax and the percentage of sales tax increases with the additional costs. Not always, but usually. But that's not what's happened here. And that's, again, a red herring by the provincial government to try to equate the HST somehow with healthcare and education. It was supposed to be revenue neutral. Then when we found out they were taking $850 million more, Premier Clark admitted, yeah, it was a tax grab, but we're not going to cancel that. We're just going to give you the money back. And trust me, it'll be, kind of what you paid. But we know that's not true. So HST has nothing to do with healthcare and education.
All right.
I think the question, Mr. Chairman, if you can, in case was, how are we going to pay for these increasing costs? Is that the
How do we continue, when we keep on asking for more, how do we pay for these?
We fundamentally, in Canada and British Columbia, tax ourselves three different ways. We tax via consumption, like the GST or the PST or the HST. We tax on income, corporate, personal, otherwise. We also tax on capital tax. So it's a fair, sensible, legitimate question to say what's the best model, and that's why meetings like this are probably a very useful exercise to have that debate. I respectfully argue that a consumption tax is a better way to go. In fact, I'll throw one out there. I would rather you increase the tax, this is my personal opinion, the HST, to 14%, but get rid of my personal income tax altogether. How many times have we heard people say, I don't want to work overtime because the government's going to take all my money? How many times did the smartest and best and most articulate part of our workforce stay disengaged from the workforce because the government's going to take too much for their effort? If you go out and buy this pen today, you make a decision whether or not you wish to pay tax. You may choose to buy it, you may not. If you're very poor, and if we are smart in the way we manage our rebate system, we keep it neutral. How we do that is a thoughtful debate, and we should engage in that more often, and perhaps even more nicely. But at the end of the day, if we can only choose between consumption, where we choose to pay, income, where there's a disincentive to work, or capital, where there's a disincentive to invest and create jobs, I would err on the side of jobs. I would err on the side of a consumption tax.
Thanks, Dan. Okay, Bill, you wanted a real quick.
Very quickly.
Very quick.
I think Dan has pointed out the very danger that we've been talking about and that which we witnessed in Europe, where they started out at 6 or 7% and they're now at 21%. It's easy to grab from the consumers, so that's where they tend to go. But if that rationale if that's correct, we could keep upping it, but if there comes a point where there's nothing left with the consumer, and if you don't have the money to purchase Business won't survive. That's all there's to it.
Okay.
And if you think the lineups are bad now going into Alberta from places like Dawson Creek and Fort St. John and from Surrey and Langley and elsewhere on the lower mainland, put it up to 14% and you'll see lineups like you've never seen.
Okay, we're going to give you a quick comment back. Very quick.
Okay, a quick comment back. With respect to cross-border shopping, the taxes get collected at the time that the goods are come into the country. And second, with respect to the concern of the tax going up, you know how much you hate the GST and the HST? What's happened to the GST in Canada? Let's not go overseas, let's go home. We have seen the GST rate came in at 7%, has dropped to 6%, has dropped to 5%. We've seen the HST start at 7%, combined rate 12%, and it's going to 10. So when he's saying it's going the wrong way, the evidence in Canada is the exact opposite.
Okay, our next question is to Dan. I pay almost $400 more a year in strata fees, additional real estate and legal fees for the house I sold, and thousands of unanticipated dollars on the car lease I had planned to buy out. In 2011 alone, 6 months, I've already paid approximately $5,000 more than I would have prior to the HST. How is this a benefit to me? So this person has identified a number of areas that the HST adds up against him.
Well, first of all, the car lease was already taxable. I have a friend of mine that works on a lot selling campers, and he told me a great story how when somebody came in this year and he saw the HST, he said, "Can you believe that? I've got to pay 12%. And he quietly whispered in his ear, "Well, 6 months ago you had to pay 12%. We just called it 2 taxes." So sometimes we have to make a decision if we're talking about real numbers, if we're making them up, or if we want to have an honest debate. So with respect to the car lease, let's be clear, there's been no change there. To say that you spent an extra $5,000 in taxes on stuff, my friend here with the calculator is going to work. So let's think this number through for a second, okay? But if you're spending $5,000 more in taxes, that means that you spent $71,000 on more stuff this year than you did on stuff last year. And you know what? I don't believe it.
Okay. Any comments? Okay, we're running out of time very quickly. Let's go up here for an audience.
I just want to quickly comment on that.
All right.
Just very quickly. One of the things that we've said all along, and you know this yourselves, to calculate your real HST hit, you really have to do it over about a 5, even a 10-year period of time. Because in that time, you might re-roof your house, put new gutters on, you'll have a big expense. And that's where you see a big HST cost that wasn't there before. So it's not just the day-to-day items, the Tim Hortons coffee and your haircut and taxi cabs and everything else. It's the big-ticket items that you have to add in too. And when you calculate that out over a long period of time, it does add up to thousands, and I do believe that guy.
Okay. All right. Okay, let's go to the
Mr. Robertson, in your opening remarks, you made mention that the government in the future is going to be scared to raise the HST rate. Don't you think that's naive?
No, actually.
Let me just finish.
Okay.
Let me just finish. Yep. Let's just look at how this HST came in. We had an election, at which time the government indicated it would not be bringing in any HST or any sort of talk about that or whatever. 2 months after that election was over, what did they do? They brought in this HST. They had the gall and the arrogance to do that. Now, to think that in the future, whether it's 2 or 3 or 4 years down the road, that this government will not have that same gall and arrogance again, that's a height of naivety, especially since this HST, as Chris has shown out, is very easy to raise and ramp up, and that's why they like it.
Okay, now I think what he's asking is basically, are there any guarantees? How are we to believe that the HST will not be raised?
Canada is different than Europe, and specifically different. It's not included in the price. Let me be very clear. It's not included in the price, and that was by design. Michael Wilson said that the bureaucrats in Ottawa convinced them to make it GST extra, and they did that because they knew that if it was extra, it would be very difficult politically to raise the tax. People would pay a price for doing it. In Europe, it's included in the price. They increase it, you don't see it. You don't have a clue that that's happened. In Canada, look at the impact. Just look at the actual evidence. GST was brought in at 7%. It's now 5%. It's dropped. The HST was brought in at 12%. it's now dropped because of this
Just one thing.
I'm sorry.
Look at the evidence. Look at the evidence. So just one
You've
thing.
asked your question. Let's let Bill and Chris have a crack at it, okay?
Well, just to respond, it's sort of interesting. He keeps quoting the federal government. Most of you will recall when the Conservatives began lowering the GST, they did it a point and then another point, and they said the idea was to reduce it down to zero, to get rid of it altogether. Because the Chrétien government had said they were going to cancel it and never did. So the Harper government said, we'll lower it and get it down to zero. Does anybody believe that now that they've harmonized with British Columbia, that they're going to get rid of it altogether? No way. That is designed to keep forever, and it will only go up. It never goes down. We know that. Voting yes to extinguish the tax guarantees that we get rid of it once and for all. It's a cancer in British Columbia.
Chris, it's just gone down.
Okay.
It's just gone down.
Are you okay? Are you good? Yep. Quickly.
You know, you're talking about all of this stuff about how the government won't raise the HST. This again is the same government that said it wouldn't sell BC Rail and then turned around and did it.
Okay. Let me be clear. I'm not here to debate BC Rail. I'm here to give you some facts on
we'll just
HST.
stop right there because we're running out of time. We have a question up here in the back.
Well, I'm just a common citizen, actually. In fact, I'm a pensioner. And I'm not going to throw away or throw any figures of numbers around as how much it's going I have to pay to give you the benefit of the doubt. But all I know, I'm paying more, way more than I had before.
On what, sir?
On food. Today
No, there's
we
no
have
PST on food. There's no HST on food.
I think what he's... Well, hold on.
There's
I think
on
what
restaurant
you're
meals
saying
and
is his
instruments.
lifestyle is costing him more right now.
Okay, so, but what do you spend on?
We had our flooring done today, so we have to pay HST on that as well.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Our flooring, you know,
Flooring was already subject to
the
the
labor.
tax. It was subject to PST.
I mean, there is, I believe, 120 items that are now on the list that we're paying more. But my real question to you is actually, from what I understand, it's unconstitutional for the federals to collect the taxes of a province, and it's in our constitution from 1800 and whatever I understand. Is that correct or not?
No, that's not correct at all. There have been tax collection agreements since 1955 dealing with personal income tax, dealing with corporate income tax, and dealing with HST starting in 1997 with the three Atlantic provinces, pardon me. There is nothing that stops the governments from entering into agreements, and let's be very clear. In Quebec, you have to file two tax returns. You got to prepare a personal income tax return for the province of Quebec, and you got to prepare a personal income tax return for the federal government. In BC, we don't do that. We prepare one return.
Okay.
What we've done with HST is, like I said, the choice here is a choice between paying two taxes at 12% or one tax at 10%.
Okay.
Well, I put two.
Respond to the
Just
Constitution.
one moment, please.
So regard to your constitutional question, you're actually correct. The Constitution of Canada, the Constitution Act of 1867, says in section 92.2 that the province has the exclusive jurisdiction for the direct taxation of taxes within the province for provincial purposes. In order to get around that, what they did with the HST was they made it a 100% federal tax. The HST is a 100% federal tax. In exchange for getting a portion of our own money back from Ottawa, we have given up the ability to tax PST. So it's a bit of a lawyer's game to get around the Constitution because the Constitution forbids the federal government from collecting British Columbia sales taxes.
Okay, we're really out of time, so I'm wondering if I can get to this fella here. We've got time for two questions left. Is that fine? Thanks. Okay, two questions left. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. What I wanted to know is that we've all talked about that the province was...
No, you'll have to use that because people are listening to us online, please.
That the province was worried about all these billions and billions of dollars of investment moving to other provinces. Have they done a research on what kind of industries were they looking at when they looked at these billions of dollars in investment? Because what most of us know as BC is all about natural resources, forestry, and these are all location-based. You can't move these from BC to some other province.
I'll give you two examples.
Yeah, if you want to be in these industries which are bread and butter, so how does that impact The decision.
Let me give you two examples. First of all, when HST was introduced 3 weeks after, I got a phone call from a client in the United States. They asked me, we're looking to put a $20 million facility in Western Canada. Do we put it in Calgary or Vancouver? Is there any tax advantage between the two? And at the time I sat down and I said, at the time, the corporate income tax rates were the same, no advantage. There was no capital tax. With the elimination, if they had put it before, with PST, I would have said you put it in Calgary. Because a $20 million facility, they would have paid an extra $1 million to $1.4 million in provincial sales tax. And they would have moved that there. I asked them, how many jobs come along with it? They turned and they said, there's 50 full-time jobs and 150 part-time jobs. The second example is how PST kills jobs. My friend Sean and his wife lived in Toronto. He runs an audio-visual business. He has some high-tech software and a bunch of computers. He paid PST on those computers and the software when he bought it in Ontario. He moved to British Columbia because they wanted to be closer to her family because her parents were getting older. And the first thing that happens is he registered his business and they sent him a bill for $16,000 in PST. And he said, what's this for? And he says, it's for the equipment you brought in. And he said, but I paid PST in Ontario. And the government said, it doesn't matter, you have to pay the tax here. And he said, it's got no value. And he says, under the legislation, it's worth 50% of what we purchased it for.
Okay.
He spent $16,000 in tax just to start doing business in BC.
Okay, we'll just ask you to hold your question because Chris would like to get a comment in, please.
So very quickly, usually when there's new investment in an economy, you see an increase in jobs. On July 1st, 2010, when the HST came in, the unemployment rate in British Columbia was 7.4%. After 1 year under the HST, it's now 8.8%. That's tens of thousands of jobs lost. Now think about that. The rest of the world is coming out of recession. We were in the depths of our recession. We're going deeper in. You don't get a net loss in jobs when you have a net increase in investment. I'm sorry.
Okay, last question.
Thank you. I just want to say that as a young person who seems to be in the minority here tonight, I was taught by my elders to be respectful, and I'm appalled by the behavior here tonight. I've come tonight, like most, to engage and to get some answers, but I can't hear the answers, so I would ask that for the remainder of the evening, let's take a deep breath and listen carefully and respectfully. My name is Jennifer Brandel-McCall, and I'm the CEO of the Prince George Chamber of Commerce. My question for the opponents tonight is, while largely ignored by the media and the opponents, we cannot ignore the fact that as a province, we live and die on our ability to attract investment and export goods and natural resources. Without harmonization, these sectors will be placed at such a competitive disadvantage that they will
Okay, let's move along to the question.
That they will not survive. My question for you is,
thank you.
How do you propose to make our economy competitive for investment, if not with the HST?
Okay. Okay, so the question is, how do we make our economy competitive without the HST?
You want to be competitive with Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta? They have no HST. They have the lowest unemployment rates in the country, and they've got the greatest amount of economic growth. You want to compete with Idaho, Washington, Nevada, Oregon, California? They don't have an HST. And in fact, we have people going in droves from the lower mainland particularly to Washington to do their shopping. I think that's very unfortunate. I think we should keep the money in Canada. We should support local industry, but a lot of people find that the savings are such that they simply can't afford to shop at home. That's sad. And HST will make it more difficult still.
Actually, once again, Mr. Vander Zalm, you know that HST is collected at the border on goods that are brought into the country. There's no competitive advantage from a tax perspective. If anything, you're paying Washington state sales tax and then getting tax on tax.
Okay. All right, please. All right, we'll just allow David to finish off, and then we'll move on to the closing statements.
Before we get to the closing statements, I do have a question for Mr. Vander Zalm.
No, there's no more questions. No more questions. All right, let's move along then to the closing statements. Now, this one we do in the reverse order, and so we'll talk to the Fight HST committee first of all, and you have 1 or 2 minutes then to provide a closing statement.
Well, folks, this is the greatest opportunity we've ever had in this province and in this country to really practice democracy and to tell the politicians how it is they need to respond to the will of the people. I think we have an opportunity here such as we've never had it before. And we need to tell the politicians, as I mentioned earlier, that they're there to represent the will of the people, not the will of a political party or the will of a political leader, but the will of the people. That's, I think, a responsibility on our part, and we have that opportunity. It's never been here before. We have it today. So I want you to, not only those here, but tell your family, your friends, your neighbors, everyone you know on the street elsewhere to get out or to vote, to get that ballot, and to vote yes to extinguish the HST. Yes to extinguish the HST and save you money. Thank you.
Thank you. David? Dan?
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, tonight was an interesting night in democracy. I congratulate Bill and Chris for coming up north, and Mr. Chairman, to you for your leadership tonight, and ladies and gentlemen, for you for coming out. But there's a question that I asked myself throughout this process. Before I came to this tonight, I was expecting a bit more of a technical meeting. I was expecting a debate about what's the best way to manage tax credits, what's the best way to create jobs. And I left this meeting, or I will leave this meeting, perhaps with a question more than an answer. And I suggest that if this debate, this very useful public debate, if it's about hating the government, if it's about hating the politicians, if it's about hating Gordon Campbell, if it's about hating the HST, then in that case, you should not stand with us. You should stand with them. But if it's about, as I believe it to be, sincerely and honestly, if it's about creating an environment that creates jobs so our children have a better place to live, then stand with us. If it's about letting free-minded people have free speech, about free ideas, then stand with us. If it's about creating a northern economy that's of the north, by the north, for the north, in our capital-driven market, then stand with us. And you'll be given a ballot to go and vote. And God bless you for it, because men and women died for your right to use that. But I say at the end of the day, thoughtfully, respectfully, look at both sides of the issue. Ignore the rhetoric and vote for yourself. Because even if you don't stand with us, we thank you for voting.
All right, thank you. Okay, I think one thing we've all noticed is that this is a very emotional issue, and I think it's something that you have to remember needs to inspire you to get out and exercise your democratic right. When those ballots come out, and they'll be mailed out on June 13th, you'll have an opportunity to cast your ballot and drop it in the mailbox, and your voice will be heard through a check mark. So I really encourage you. I don't think there's any problem with the folks showing up here getting out and making their vote. However, make sure you touch your family, your friends, others. Make sure that you talk to them about this issue, and make sure you get them involved, and make sure that they vote. So British Columbia's true feeling is heard in mid-August when the ballots are finally counted. Now, this is only the second of 13 or 11 meetings across the province. Up at the very top, you'll see the website. It's very easy to search for. Follow the other debates. There'll be other questions. There'll be people bringing up questions you haven't heard of tonight. And there'll be discussions that may be of interest. Go ahead and follow those debates on the internet and think about it and make your decision. But before we go, we should say thank you to these four gentlemen who have spent the night with us in Prince George. Thank you for coming to Prince George. Thank you for enjoying UNBC, and thank you for bringing your points of view, all of you, and letting us discuss them. Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Thanks, David. Well done.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you, guys.
That was a tough crowd.
Thanks.